All right, well, Manso alongside Clay Ferraro for the return of our Miami Sports Pod in the doldrums of the summer. It's supposed to be, Clay, because it's supposed to be quiet in the summer, except if you're an NBA fan and you want your team to be involved in free agency and in any kind of trades. But so far, as we begin, Clay, the Heat haven't done anything. And I think people are wondering, okay, is Pat Riley asleep at the wheel? Like, what's going on here? Like, why are the Heat not involved in any of the big moves so far? And can they get involved in some of these big moves at some point soon?
Well, something happened on the first day of free agency.
Okay.
And I don't know if it got a lot of attention outside of Miami and Philadelphia. Very strange move.
Uh-oh.
Very strange.
Uh-oh. I feel a wind horse coming here.
Why would Pat Riley let PJ Tucker go to another Eastern Conference rival?
I feel the windy right through the computer here. I feel it.
So
you got the point down, by the way. You got the point down.
We had to pay him on. So here's the deal. And I think we all know how Pat Riley operates and hat tip to wind horse. That just a fantastic few days. And it's why we love the NBA. It's the drama, it's the sidebars, it's the memes from Windhorst and what he did on ESPN. Here's where we are with the Heat. Okay. Pat Riley wants the big fish. We know he does. They are not going to do anything that might compromise their ability to go after Kevin Durant, Donovan Mitchell, and whoever else. I don't know that I would quite put John Collins on that level. I don't know that they're necessarily interested in Kyrie Irving. We just can't read their mind. What we do know is that Kevin Durant is exactly the type of player that Pat Riley goes after. Donovan Mitchell is exactly the type of player we know that the Heat have been interested in for a long time. PJ Tucker's situation was one where, because he took the deal that he did, the full mid-level with Philadelphia, could the Heat have matched it? Yes, or at least come very close relative to the numbers, whatever. The problem is it would have hard capped the Heat. And, we can kind of get a little bit deeper into the weeds on a podcast like this. It would have really hurt their ability to go after somebody like a Kevin Durant, somebody like a Donovan Mitchell, because what you would have had to do, kind of the gymnastics, the hurdles you would have had to cross in order to make it happen, in addition to finding a package that Brooklyn or Utah would like, or whoever. So basically where we're at with the Miami Heat and why the Heat haven't done anything yet is they're waiting on the big fish.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I agree with you on that.
Anything else will, because you can't give up any space that you may have to use in order to get those guys. Getting Victor Oladipo to come back and Dwayne Dedmon, those are moves that don't affect it. You're basically filling out the roster. Now, the second that you don't get Kevin Durant or Donovan Mitchell says he doesn't want out, whatever, then we'll see some of these other moves. But that's right now why we're in a holding pattern, and frankly, a lot of the league is.
Yeah, I don't get panicked. I think people want everything to happen so fast. But the way I break this down for Heat fans is simple. Pat Riley, the way he works, he wants to get a star player. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And we'll break down the stars that are available. And at this point, it really is Kevin Durant and Donovan Mitchell that makes sense for the Heat. But you look at those star players available, they're still available, meaning they haven't been traded. So it's not like we're reactionary to, well, the Heat didn't make a move, didn't get one of those guys. Now what? If we reach that point, then you have that conversation. Like, okay, now what? The Heat missed out on the big fish, the whale, whatever you want to call them. We'll call them the orca sometimes, like Pat Riley does. But I mean, the bottom line is those guys are still available. And behind the scenes, the Heat want those guys. So why would they make any moves that could impact them getting those guys? And when you look at the moves that have been made around the league, I know people see like a Danilo Gallinari, they see a Malcolm Brogdon, two guys that in particular went to the Celtics. And let's face it, the Celtics are better right now. They're better, and they beat the Heat last year in a close 7-game series. So as it stands right now, right now, as we enter July, the Boston Celtics are better than Miami Heat. But that's not what Pat Riley's worried about. He's worried about what will the Miami Heat be when the season rolls around in October. And I think when you look at it that way, and from the moves that are left to be made, you can't judge it. You can't panic. You can't criticize Pat. And that's not to say that this is going to be a perfect offseason, Clay. I mean, the Heat may miss out on these stars, and they may have to go fill pieces and get a PJ Tucker replacement that doesn't have the intangibles and the leadership that PJ Tucker has. They lose PJ. It's a big blow in the sense of leadership, defense, comfort in the Heat system. There's a lot that PJ did well and the Heat valued. But I think the Heat right now know that if they need to get something else to get over the hump. It's not re-signing PJ Tucker. It's not finding an equivalent to PJ Tucker. It's finding someone who could team with Jimmy and Bam to truly put themselves and elevate themselves to that championship level, which, oh, by the way, they were one shot away last year from getting to the NBA Finals. So my advice to Heat fans is don't panic. I haven't gotten involved in it. I know you haven't either, Clay. We're all following the moves. We joke about Brian Windhorst and we joke about Woj and Shams and the things they say. And, Heat fans and Heat Twitter gets excited. I get it. It's fun. But you and I haven't really delved too much into it because nothing has really happened to lead me to think that the Heat can't make one of these moves. So when you look at it, let's start with the whale. The whale is Kevin Durant. And it's no secret that Kevin Durant is available, as it's been reported now. There's no secret that, according to reports, half the league wants him. I'm surprised it's not the entire league. I mean, who doesn't want one of the elite scorers in the history of our league who's still at 33, 34, has a few good years of putting up 30 points a game. So the question for the Heat is, how do you get the whale? How do you reel in the whale? How do you get it done? And Clay, that's where I start with. How do the Heat find a way to get Kevin Durant? Do they have the pieces? And how do those pieces measure to teams that are out there that maybe are interested in making that move as well?
So he said reportedly that he wants to go to either Phoenix or Miami. It feels like Phoenix is 1 with Miami 2. We don't know the gap between those two. If it's just the two of those teams, the Heat have the better players that they could offer between the two, assuming that Devin Booker is off the table, Chris Paul, no reason why Brooklyn would want him. So beyond that, you're basically talking about guys like Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson. Those are the types of players that Phoenix would want to include. Whereas with the Heat, you're talking about Tyler Hero. He'd obviously be the centerpiece, and he'd be better than anybody that the Suns could offer beyond Devin Booker. And then maybe Gabe Vincent, Max Strus. Those are the types of plus contracts that the Heat would offer. The draft pick compensation, Phoenix would have the better end of the deal because they can offer 4 first-round picks. Miami can offer 3 if they remove the protections from another pick. So it's relatively even here when you're talking about what Phoenix versus Miami can offer 1-for-1, team for team, Brooklyn, if it's a 2-team deal. The issue is, number one, you could always have a third team enter the mix. And we've actually heard Utah being interested in DeAndre Ayton. You could have a 3-way trade with Phoenix and Utah and Brooklyn and Ayton. So they seem to have a few more paths to make it work. Again, if it's just Phoenix and Miami. The problem for the Heat, and frankly for the Suns, is look at what Toronto can offer. I mean, you're talking about a package that could include just a couple.
I mean, Scotty Barnes,
OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam. I don't know if Fred VanVleet would be somebody intriguing, but you're talking about young players, guys who could be really intriguing to a Brooklyn team that's going to have to rebuild. So the problem for the Heat and for the Suns is that other teams around the league can offer more than they can, and by a significant margin. So if it's just the Heat and
you're saying from a player perspective, though, to be able to put a more established young player, maybe so. Than
yes, and then you get into, all right, Oklahoma City could probably offer like 20 first-round picks. I don't know the exact number, but they have an insane amount of picks, and they could offer them. I mean, so the packages that other teams beyond those two could offer would widely blow away what Miami and Phoenix could offer. But if it's just Miami and Phoenix, the Heat have a shot. But that shot is Brooklyn is not getting dollar for dollar what you would get for a player of Kevin Durant's caliber.
No. And the reality too is this is a different situation. We always talk about it, not just you and I, but I think in general, fans of the NBA and people who cover the NBA talk about the power of the star athlete now to be able to dictate where he wants to go. And in most cases, that is the case, right? I want to go either here or here, and that's where I'm going to end up. In Kevin Durant's case, it's a little different. He's got 4 years left on his contract. This isn't a situation where his contract's expiring in a year and you're staring at him, losing him out for nothing and not knowing where he's going to go and in free agency and decisions he can make. Kevin Durant doesn't control the cards in this one because he has 4 years left and a lot of money on his contract. And by the way, again, I mentioned his age, 33 going into his 34-year season. That's an age where this is it. I mean, this stretch of 4 years is it. It's not like Kevin Durant's 24 and he's got to say, because then he's got to, hey, where's he going to go elsewhere to fill out his career? That's where it gets tricky for the Heat. And like you said, other teams as well. The Nets can really scour around and find the best package. There is no rush, by the way. That's another thing. the other day when this news broke, and I said the other day, what was it, 4 days ago when it broke that Kevin Durant, as we taped down a Sunday, it was Thursday, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that the news broke that Kevin Durant wanted to get a trade, seek a trade, and the whole Miami Phoenix talk started. I mean, this could linger a bit. That may not. It may it may end this week, but I think you have to understand. I think people have to understand this is not such a rush job, and there's not so much pressure on the Nets knowing they've got him for 4 more years. And while he can dictate a lot and say he wants to go, and the star does have power as usual, it doesn't have the absolute power it tends to have in these situations. And I think that can get tricky a bit for the Heat and other teams.
I'll say this, and we're going to go into, I'm sure, Donovan Mitchell and things like that, but kind of going a different direction for a second. This is going back to what you said at the outset here about don't freak out if you're a Heat fan. Who have the Heat lost out on that would concern you? I'll be completely transparent. The guy I would have really wanted, and I've said it for a long time, is Malcolm Brogdon.
I agree with you.
Great.
I think PJ is the obvious one. PJ, having kept PJ seemed like a priority. You and I had this discussion, though, early in the offseason where I think from within, I don't think the Heat expected to keep PJ. I think there had been chatter and talk within the organization that PJ was going to look for a 3rd year and more money as a 37-year-old. Go get your money, PJ. And I think, as you referenced earlier, the reasons why you don't want to attach yourself to that kind of money, what it limits in flexibility. I just think what's the one word that Pat Riley's used most, I think, in the last 5 years when talking about free agency and trades?
Flexibility.
Flexibility.
Yep.
And if you limit your flexibility for a 37-year-old when all these whales are potentially out there, it doesn't make sense for your organization as much as it hurt. But I agree with you on Brogdon for one.
Yeah. And so let's go back then to a couple of years ago, because basically the Heat made the same decision just for a different reason with Jay Crowder that they made with PJ Tucker now. Jay Crowder wanted more years, which you can understand because the Heat were trying to keep some flexibility because Giannis Antetokounmpo hadn't made a final decision yet. And it was one guy that they were focused on. In this case with PJ Tucker, based on what I've heard and what I've kind of been able to put together, it wasn't even as much the 3rd year. It was reaching the full mid-level and getting, I think it was maybe 26 million versus 33 over those 3 years, whatever it is. And I do want to clear one thing up because a lot of people say, oh, well, with state tax, it would have been very similar. What happens if the Heat had traded him halfway through the year out to California? Yeah. And then all of a sudden you're paying more. So from PJ Tucker's perspective, you understand it.
Yeah, you go get your money. Go get your money on a good team, by the way.
I am by no means am I sitting here saying PJ Tucker was not a loss. I am not. I'm a huge fan. I'm probably a bigger fan. I think it's going to be a bigger loss than a lot of people do. But I also think that you don't want to take yourself out of the running. I'm not just talking about this summer. From now until February, you could get to the trade deadline. And if there's no clarity on the Donovan Mitchell situation by then you start to make these moves. And by January, you could potentially include Victor Oladipo in a deal. There's some other things that could be in play there. So I understand what the Heat are doing. And I think especially when you look around the rest of the Eastern Conference, would a Danilo Gallinari have made you better enough to compete with the better that Boston had gotten before?
Well, I think that combination, look, let's flip roles. If the Heat had gotten Danilo and Malcolm Brogdon, I think you say that as close as the Heat and Celtics were last year, their nucleus remains the same. Their core guys but they have better role players in depth. I think in that sense, I think the tricky part is because Boston got them both, and the Heat haven't done anything anything yet. As far as additions, it's freaking people out. And I understand people want the instant gratification of it. Hey, we got a guy, we got our superstar. Let's get to Donovan Mitchell. If we call Kevin Durant the whale, remember a couple of years after he started the whale, Pat Riley said maybe it's an orca. All right, so let's call Donovan Mitchell the orca. He's the orca. Orcas are big too. Orcas can do some damage. I mean, orcas are a key to a franchise winning a championship. And Donovan Mitchell's one of those guys. Now, look, the Rudy Gobert move all of a sudden in Utah puts a lot of, when you look at what they got in return, it doesn't look like a team that is building around Donovan Mitchell. It doesn't look like a team that's acquiring assets to build around Donovan Mitchell for now. Now, unlike Kevin Durant, Donovan Mitchell's in his mid-20s, not his, soon to be mid-30s. But unlike Kevin Durant, Donovan Mitchell's, not 7 feet tall and a 30-point per game scorer. So there are obviously some differences there. But where do you fall on getting Donovan Mitchell, what it takes to get Donovan Mitchell, and if Donovan Mitchell even wants to get out of Utah right now?
I'm giving it all up for Donovan Mitchell. I'm
What's up? Everything that we talked about Kevin Durant, all those draft picks, Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, Max Strus, whoever it may be, just throw them all in there?
First offer. The first offer you make is Tyler Hero, 3 draft picks, 3 first-round picks, pick swaps. You have to include Duncan Robinson's deal to get there salary-wise. I'm not sure what other salaries you have to put in there to get there. I would try to get away with just giving away one of Gabe Vincent, Max Strus, and Omer Yurtseven. Preferably to me, Yurtseven.
Well, I mean,
but again, it's not your choice, right? But if you have to come with a legitimate offer, and to me, a very good young player in Tyler Hero, 6th man of the year, potential all-star caliber. I don't know that I would say like perennial all-star, but I think
I think Tyler was a 20-point scorer last year off the bench. I think Tyler can become a 23-point scorer in the league. And, a guy that we've seen in big moments. To me, that could be an all-star.
That could be an all-star in the right year.
I love the fact that Donovan Mitchell goes out and he works out with Bam Adebayo over in Louisville, which I didn't get a perk with the ears of Heat fans. But you look at Donovan Mitchell, again, mid-20s, he's a scorer. Defense, obviously not maybe where you want it to be, but that's something that the Heat could take a great player and work with him and look at the system and find a way. He's not a big guy. What is Donovan Mitchell? 6'1", 6'2"?
Yeah,
he's not he's not a big guy, but man, the guy could score. When we talk about those moments in games where Jimmy Butler took over, in particular in that Boston series, and we've seen it throughout the course of his few years in Miami, that everybody says, man, if the Heat only had another guy, just another guy who could take over games at the end, well, Donovan Mitchell is that guy. So when you talk about the assets and, what it takes, I'm with you, Clay. You build these assets, right? And you don't want to just lose them all, right? You don't want to lose them all if it doesn't mean getting a star. I think that guy right there falls in the star category. Obviously, this is an all-star. Obviously, as far as a guy who's in the game to get better and growing is what he is and what he can be. It's not at all comparable to what you just said about Tyler. Like Tyler, we all feel can be an all-star. He can be a scorer. He's got to bulk up and be better. Those are things that are challenges he's going to have. Donovan Mitchell's already there. I mean, Donovan Mitchell's there, and he's been there, by the way, since the year he stepped onto that court in the NBA. He has become a star player. So I am with you on Donovan Mitchell. To me, Donovan Mitchell likely makes more sense than Kevin Durant, knowing that the battle for Kevin Durant is, as you mentioned earlier, the assets that are out there, the amount of time left on his contract where the Nets can be patient, really find the best offer, and the fact that it is Kevin Durant, that everybody in the league wants the guy. Not to say not everyone in the league wants Donovan Mitchell, but I don't think everyone is stacking their assets right now thinking Donovan Mitchell is what we need. Teams like the Heat that are so close to being a championship team can have that luxury to say, hey, let's just take all our assets and give it for Donovan Mitchell. Let's do it. Other teams don't. I don't think other teams think they're a Donovan Mitchell away. I think for the Miami Heat, they're a Donovan Mitchell away. I think he's the kind of guy who could absolutely put them over the hump to win a championship.
And relationships are important. And we know that Donovan Mitchell and Bam Adebayo were friends going back a ways. I mean, I think I've said this before, but I had people telling me about some of the back and forth those guys had in the bubble. I mean, you're talking about long-standing relationship with those guys. We know that Donovan
We've seen it this offseason already. We've seen it in the offseason between that video, between the birthday party that they all were at. I mean, and again, look, they're friends. That doesn't mean that he's going to end up here. But as you just said, relationships do matter. We've learned that throughout the years in the NBA.
And look, I think, all of a sudden, like Fat Joe has become a huge source of NBA.
He denied it.
And
no Fat Joe.
Forgive me. I wish I could source the reporter who said this was a very good Brooklyn Nets reporter. That said basically had spoken to Fat Joe, who has a relationship with Donovan Mitchell, and he said, I know that everybody thinks that Mitchell wants to get back to New York and play with the Knicks, but the Heat playing for Miami has been his dream.
But he denied. But Fat Joe denied saying that though.
Oh, so well, there we go.
Yeah, so we have it's it's NBA summer free agency when Fat Joe's putting out denials.
Well, blow it up. I mean, look, forget my ration of it. But no, look, I think you're talking about a player who, when you're talking about the desire of the player to be in a place, I haven't gotten the warm fuzzies from Kevin Durant as far as like, I really want to be in Miami at all costs. Like, that's a place where I've got really good friends. Now, I don't doubt that he has a lot of respect for Jimmy Butler. Clearly developed a rapport with Bam Adebayo when they were on the Olympic team. Like, it's not that the relationship is not there, but you don't see the level of bond that you do with Donovan Mitchell and Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler, and you can see those connections lasting. And the other thing I would say, too, is with Kevin Durant, this is probably his last big contract, right? Or his last biggest contract.
Yeah,
But,
no, I think that's absolutely the case. Yeah.
Whereas with Donovan Mitchell, he can tell a team, look, I mean, I not only do I not want to play for you now, there are other places I want to go, but my next contract where I can go wherever I want, I'm not re-signing with you. I'm going somewhere that I really want to be. And it's like, you can believe it. So I just think the leverage is a bit different for a number of different reasons. I think the desire of the player to want to be in a place matters a lot. I do think, this is going to have to come to a head because the wording of the reports and the immediate aftermath of the trade of Rudy Gobert were really interesting to me, because immediately you have Adrian Wojnarowski saying, oh, well, Utah wants to build around Donovan Mitchell. They have no plans to trade him. Then you had, I think, Andy Larson, really good Utah Jazz beat writer, basically saying, I'm getting some pushback on that. Like,
I just think the assets that they acquired alone give you a little pushback, don't they?
So, like, it feels like from the outside, Utah wants to rebuild and blow this thing up. And let's go back to, look, the whole Windhorse thing that was so funny. There was a lot of truth to that, and it bore out. That was before the Rudy Gobert trade.
He nailed it.
He was right.
Yeah, he nailed it.
But the things that he was pointing out were, look back at what Danny Ainge did when he took over Boston. He immediately traded their big three, Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, and Ray Allen. He acquired a ton of assets that he immediately, and he gave a big contract to Brad Stevens, a long contract. I mean, it was a rebuild from the ground up. You just got 4 first-round, basically 5 first-round picks. When you include the first-round pick that Minnesota just drafted, and now you can get more. You can basically get out of this with 8, 9 first-round picks, pick swaps, young players.
I mean, that's a way to rebuild. That's a way to rebuild. And by the way, they've tried with Gobert and Mitchell. It didn't work. You know, and you texted me something yesterday about the Western Conference, how stacked it's going to be. You got 10 teams that when you look on paper, depending on if they make another move this offseason, are top 4 potential. You know, you got 10 teams top 4 potential. That's crazy.
So it makes a lot more sense for Danny Ainge in Utah to follow the blueprint that he did with Boston, because look what's happening there. I mean, obviously it's been a while, but the rebuild that he put in place there, the fruits that it's borne out, you can't argue with it. And when you're in Utah right now, it's similar in that you feel like they've hit a ceiling. And so, look, if Donovan Mitchell is going to eventually leave, it makes a lot more sense for them to get what he can now. Now, I will say this. I understand that Dwayne Wade is part of Utah Jazz organization now, and Fizz just went there. And I don't think any of that matters. It's tough for Danny Ainge to send Donovan Mitchell to
that's much more important to me than Dwayne being there. And I love Dwayne, but I don't think it's going to be a case where Dwayne wants to send Donovan Mitchell to the Miami Heat. Again, unless Donovan Mitchell says, I want to go to the Miami Heat. If Donovan Mitchell comes out and you see a report next week that from Woj or Shams, Donovan Mitchell has requested a trade. His 2 destinations are the Knicks or the Heat. And then, now we're having a conversation, but we haven't.
It would almost have to be one at this point. And that's, although I guess, I don't know. We can get all the different points from all the different places. The bottom line here, I feel like the Heat should pivot. I really wouldn't waste my time anymore with Kevin Durant unless you get some sort of a really strong.
What do you think is the waste of time? Like, because you think they're missing out on what? If they wait.
I would go all in on Donovan Mitchell.
You would just say skip Durant and let's go to Mitchell.
Yes, and
I'm fine with either. By the way, I mean, this is what we're talking about. Yeah.
And look, it's not tampering if players are talking to players. So
you don't think that Bam and Donovan, while they hang out in the offseason, they talk about their futures, don't have these discussions? They're human beings. You and I have discussions about our futures and our lives, and people that work together and know each other. People
and we don't even like each other.
Yeah, and I can't stand you. That's why we're split screen in different buildings. So people from other stations, other companies tell us their thoughts. You don't think Bam and Donovan are saying, hey, man, Donovan, what are you thinking? Like in conversation, in friendly conversation, not in sort of like come to Miami kind of way. These guys don't have to recruit. Everybody knows what the Heat are about. And Donovan Mitchell certainly does. He knows what the Heat are about, just like Jimmy Butler through Dwayne knew what the Heat were about. And everybody that's come through here knows what the Heat are about. The NBA knows what the Heat's about. But I will say this, if they pivot, right, there is a possibility, and I think Heat fans don't want to hear this, but there's a possibility that they get either Kevin Durant Nor Donovan Mitchell. At
Yep.
least not to open the season, meaning you mentioned Mitchell. Mitchell may not get traded this offseason. There may be a case where later, and maybe next year, now that Bradley Beal has signed this big deal to stay in Washington, you get the Bradley Beal talk again in a year when he's miserable there, when he figures out, oh my God, I'm getting $250 million, but I'm on the Wizards, for Christ's sakes. So that is a different conversation. So when you look at what the Heat can do, if they don't do that, then does it become John Collins? I mean, is that the next? I mean, if it's whale, orca, I guess what is he, a dolphin? I'm not exactly sure what John. what's John Collins? John Collins is a very good player, by the way. He's not a Miami Dolphin. Come over here. No, he's a very good player, and I've told you this before. The Heat were very high on John Collins the draft year, and they liked both John Collins and Bam, and they ended up going with Bam. I think they felt that Bam fit more into their culture and style, which, oh, by the way, has come to fruition. He clearly does. But they were intrigued by John Collins. That's where a lot of teams were, but they were intrigued when they brought him in, and they really liked John Collins from everything that I heard. So you look at John Collins, he's there. He's played a few years in the league. He's obviously a gifted player. Does he, if they can make a move, elevate the Heat into the championship discussion further than they were already cemented? And what would it take to get a guy like John Collins?
And that's where I don't know. And I'm
with you. I don't know.
Because I would say this. I think, and this gets back to my feelings on PJ Tucker. I feel like what you have lost by PJ Tucker going elsewhere, you lose somebody who can run up and down the floor, can guard Trae Young 85 feet from the basket, come back, body up Kevin Durant if you're taking on Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's so versatile defensively, and so you lost a really good defender. John Collins is a fantastic scorer. I mean, very gifted, great touch. Not a good defender. And so do I think he's better?
Can you say the same about Donovan Mitchell, though? Can you say the same thing about Donovan Mitchell's defense as far as?
Well, yes, but I think the level up offensively, like you're talking about
a 26-point score over an 18-point score, yeah, and a guy who could dominate a game, yeah.
Yes, and to me, more importantly, somebody who can just give the ball to and get out of the way.
Well, yeah.
And Jimmy Butler doesn't have to do that all the time. You have two guys now, and so it's like you can late in games. You don't necessarily have to say, all right, we have to go to Jimmy or we have to go to Mitchell. You can pick your mismatch, and so there are certain things late in games that. You're not doing that with John Collins. And again, I think he's very gifted. He's not the type of guy that you just put the ball in his hands, get out of his way, and let him go out there and win you a ball game.
By the way, you mentioned Jimmy Butler. And when we talk about Jimmy, the one thing that's become evident is that Jimmy is obviously a superstar player, and any talk of that is, long gone. I mean, Jimmy's is willed the Heat to, in 3 seasons, an NBA Finals and one shot away from an NBA Finals for a team that, quite frankly, the way they were playing had no business in that Boston series to be anywhere close to the Celtics, and yet he pushed into a game 7 and had a final shot. But I think what's also become clear, and Pat Riley didn't want to come out and say this because I understand why, but when Pat spoke and was asked directly about, do they need someone else? He said, yeah, if you got one, I'll take it. But I think it goes beyond that, Clay. I think it's clear that for the Heat to elevate to the next level of winning a championship, they need to give Jimmy a second star, a second score. I shouldn't say a second star because Bam is, when you look at Bam is that second piece. But Bam is not, as you just pointed out, and in many ways, as you just referenced to John Collins, it's not a guy that you just say in the fourth quarter, here's the ball, take over the game. Jimmy is, Donovan Mitchell is, Kevin Durant is. If those guys aren't here, then you are asking a lot for a third time in 4 years then for Jimmy Butler to just basically say, get out of the way, Jimmy, lead us to the promised land. Man, that's a lot on one guy. Jimmy is a workout fiend, a freak. He hates losing. He's as competitive as anyone I've ever covered, but he is only one guy. And the one thing we've learned in 3 seasons that it's hard for one guy, unless that guy's maybe LeBron James or Michael Jordan, it's very hard for one guy to just carry you. And I think Jimmy has done his best. But I think, Clay, the bigger picture for the Heat is if they don't make a move, to get someone to be that second scorer, they are clearly not the top team in the East entering the season. And they may be more toward the 3, 4, 5 range the way moves are happening in the East. And I think that's what frustrates Heat fans. Anybody who tells me that right now, as it stands now, I'm okay saying that. I don't have to be a homer and say like, oh no, the Heat still, they're proven, they're one shot away. They're still the best team, them in Boston. If they don't make some moves in this course of offseason to get that another scorer, I'm not sure that I could say that and agree with it and say it with a straight face without sounding like a homer that they're in that category as a Boston and other teams. As you look at Milwaukee getting stronger, you look at, again, look at the Sixers did. I know the Sixers are a team that people question that nucleus, whether they can win with Embiid, but adding a PJ Tucker, we saw what it did for Miami. It certainly helps.
Well, and you have a healthy Embiid, presumably. I mean, and that's what we're assuming that you're going to have health all the way around, and which team is best with all that. No, Will, I mean, at this point, I would be concerned about Atlanta. I would definitely be concerned about Philadelphia, presumably.
Oh, Toronto's, depending on what Toronto does. Toronto, you mentioned some of their young talent.
Oof.
Teams get better. Teams grow. Young players get better. And, you hope that happens to the Heat with Tyler and Bam and Duncan hopefully gets back to his style and Strus and Gabe and, what Kyle Lowry comes back like. I mean, I am with Heat fans on this one when they get frustrated because you are seeing other teams get better while you're not yet. But back to the original point, Clay, it's early in the offseason. If in a month and a half the Heat haven't made a move yet and Kevin Durant went elsewhere, Mitchell is not going anywhere or something, John Collins goes elsewhere, whatever it may be, and the Heat are just filling spots with veteran guys to fill in on, just to kind of fill the roles, then I'm a little worried about the conversation we're having.
Had you told me that they could have gotten Brogdon and either kept PJ or pivoted and gotten John Collins too, then I think they're in that conversation. Gallinari doesn't worry me. He didn't seem like the same player towards the end of his Atlanta tenure. He was coming off the bench at that point and just didn't.
Yeah, he's a solid piece, but he's a very solid on that team though that we just saw with the nucleus they have of youth and the players that they have. That's a really nice move. That's for that roster.
But like you're talking about who the Heat missed out on. Right?
Oh, no. So I'm not losing sleep over not getting to the Gallinari. No. By the way, as much as I like Brogdon, I'm not losing sleep about that either. The only way I'm losing sleep as a Heat fan, again, is if a month and a half we're having this conversation, they didn't get that big second score, and now they're just filling in pieces, and they lost PJ. Then I can see why Heat fans would be frustrated, and I'd be all in with you if that were the case.
And I feel like Brogdon could have done that to a certain extent. Yeah, I'm higher on him than I think a lot of people are, but it's only
he's a 19-point scorer. He's a very good player.
That's the one to me that if this whole thing goes the wrong direction, you don't get Durant, you don't get Donovan Mitchell, you don't come together with some sort of trade that we're not seeing right now where you're bringing in high-level scorer plus a good option at the forward next to Bam. That would be the one that I would have looked at and said, because of how much it helped Boston and because of how much I think it would have helped you, that would have been the one that I would have wished they could have come away with.
Yeah.
I still don't know that it would have been, but you also, if you're a Heat fan, you have to take the good with the bad sometimes. And when the opportunity to get a Kevin Durant or Donovan Mitchell presents itself, Pat Riley
is going to jump in. And that's where you should feel good as a Heat fan. Like if we're going to let's end it now by saying this. I think Heat fans I understand they get what do the kids call it? The FOMO, right? The fear of missing out. Like they see all these people going everywhere and they're freaking out. And I get it because we're all fans. Even in the media, we're fans. Like we love seeing moves. You love seeing the team you cover get players, whatever it may be. But I think when you're really looking at the big picture, Pat Riley isn't sitting there going, "Oh, I missed Brogdon. Oh man, I missed Gallinari." He's thinking, it's Kevin Durant. It's right there. Donovan Mitchell's right there. Let's get one of those guys. Let's figure it out. Because he knows if he doesn't and he takes a big swing and he misses, he's got other options that are going to be just fine that they could find. I think in his mind, again, I know Heat fans don't feel that confident that they'll have guys that'll fill in and make them better, but they'll find guys. But if you don't take a swing at those guys and you just settle, then I think as a fan, you got to be disappointed in your front office. And that's why as a Heat fan, you should always be excited knowing your front office is going to take big swings. They're not trying to hit line drives to right field. They're trying to hit bombs to center field. That's all they care about. And the two biggest are out there, as we referenced, in Durant and Mitchell. So let's end this by saying that I'm going to Europe for a couple of weeks. So I don't want anybody to bother me unless the Heat get Kevin Durant, Donovan Mitchell. I'll do an emergency pod from Barcelona if the Heat get Kevin Durant.
Very nice. Nice.
Have some tapas, drinking some sangria. And then
you're a little bit more sangria than you would otherwise. You'll have to have the establishment rename the sangria after. That's the way. Spider sangria.
I'm taking my Heat Vice jersey over to Europe just in case they do get one of those guys, so that I can wear it with pride. So, anyways, that's your Miami Sports Pod. We always appreciate you listening, subscribing. Clay and I'll be back in a couple of weeks, hopefully with some moves. Because if not, then I know the Heat fans will just be panicking. So, thanks for listening.